Didn't the other kids tell you not to come here? Go back before it's too late!
At the heart of horror, there has always been more than spooks and scares.
Sometimes, it's not what you see, but what you hear.
Welcome to Sound Scary.
Each week, we talk to the artists,
The musicians,
the fans, the people who haunt the shadowy corners of your mind.
join us as we delve into the deepest
Darkest.
and most unforgettable earscapes.
Welcome
To Sound Scary.
Scary. I am your host, Ryan Coltrera, running solo today without my co-host, Jimmy O. Today, we are happy to welcome puppeteer Artie Esposito to the show. You know his work the most recently from Five Nights at Freddy's. He puppeteered the main man himself. He worked on Jungle Book. He's worked with Weird Al, Pee-Wee Herman. Artie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So just to kick things off, I kind of wanted to take a dive back into your background a little bit. What initially brought you into your love of working with puppets?
So I always wanted to be a puppeteer since I was 4 years old, which is crazy because who wants to, who even knows at that age that that's what they want to do? But I was a huge fan of Sesame Street and the Muppets. I remember my parents, we would always, of course, sit at the table for dinner and stuff. And on Friday nights, the Muppet Show would air. So we would, they would let us go and sit in front of the TV and watch the Muppet Show while we ate. And that was a big influence on me, a big influence on my sense of humor and stuff like that.
Mm.
And I remember in kindergarten, we had to draw what we wanted to be when we grew up. And people were drawing like doctors and policemen and firemen and stuff like that. And I drew Ernie from Sesame Street. And the teacher said, "You want to be Ernie when you grow up?" And I said, "Well, I want to be the man who plays Ernie." And she said, "Oh, that man's name is Jim Henson, and he's a puppeteer." And I said, "Oh, that's what I want to do. I want to be a puppeteer." And yeah, so throughout most of my childhood, I would do puppet shows over my bunk bed. I would go up on my bunk bed and I would have my Muppet characters and my Disney characters and stuff, and I would do little shows like that. And it was something I continued to want to do throughout my childhood. And then I went to school for animation, actually. I had decided when I was a little bit older that I wanted to maybe go into animation for Disney. And my parents were like, "Well, I know you want to be a puppeteer, but you've got to have a backup career." So my backup career was going to be as an artist. So I went to school for animation, Ringling School of Art and Design in Sarasota, Florida. Mm-hmm. And I realized very quickly how tedious animation is. Hand-drawn animation. This was before CG. Jurassic Park had just come out, but hand-drawn animation was still the main thing. Anyway, so I started doing some theater shows in college with puppets. And then when I graduated, I was sort of really burned out on drawing. I had enjoyed it through most of my life, and I just didn't enjoy it like I used to now that I had to do it on a daily basis for school projects and things like that. And I started dating my girlfriend, who's my wife. And we had gone to visit my parents for Christmas right after I graduated. And my wife said, "Well, what about being a puppeteer? You always talked about how you wanted to be a puppeteer." And I was like, "Yeah." And she said, "Doesn't Disney World have puppet shows there where you can sort of get your start?" And I was like, "Yeah, they do, actually." and we were driving in the car at the time. So when I got home, I opened up the Yellow Pages, which was the way that you got phone numbers back then, and I called up the Disney audition hotline, and literally the recording went like this: "Hi, thanks for calling the Disney audition hotline. We are looking for puppeteers. If you are a puppeteer or anyone knows puppeteers, we're holding auditions tomorrow here in Orlando." And I was like, okay. And I went to the audition the next day, and I was hired. Myself and 2 other people were hired, and the other people are Scott and James Silson, who James wound up becoming the puppet master for Walt Disney World, and Scott became puppet master for Disneyland after many, many years of puppeteering and things like that. So the 3 of us who auditioned that day all went on to do like some really cool things.
Wow.
And and that is how my puppetry career started.
And what kind of brought you from working there to working in film and coming out here to Los Angeles?
Right. So I worked at Disney for about 4 years, and then a friend of mine was the puppet captain on Crank Yankers. I don't know if you're familiar with that show.
Oh yeah.
And the first season we shot in New York. Anyway, he called me up and he said, "Do you want to come work on this? We have 4 puppeteers, but you could be the 5th puppeteer, which is when we need an extra person, we can pull you in." And I was like, great. And I went to Disney and I said, "Hey, so I just want to take 2 months off so that I can shoot this TV show. I'll come back an even better performer." And they were like, "No, we can't give you the time off. You either have to stay and not do it, or you have to quit." And I said, "Oh, okay, then I quit." Because I always promised myself that I was going to take the opportunities as they came, and that I wasn't going to pass anything up. So, and it was great that they did, because had they not let me go, had they not essentially fired me by saying, you have to quit or do it, I probably would have went right back there after the show had wrapped a month later. But I couldn't. So it forced me to go out there and, pound the pavement and try to get more jobs. And that was the start of my career.
That's awesome. I mean, it really goes to show you got to kind of take the risk sometimes, because it leads to bigger and better roads.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always been a risk taker, and I don't know why. But I always feel like there's something bigger and better out there. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing, because I'm never like thrilled where I am at the time. I'm always like, oh, there's got to be something bigger. There's got to be more and more and more and more and more. But that keeps me motivated. And I think in my older age, I have started to be able to like realize when I'm doing something really good and something that like I'll look at something and say, this is the good old days. I'm going to look back at this moment and say, those were the good old days. So I think I've learned to appreciate stuff.
No, it's good. It's good to kind of have that balance too, between, always aiming bigger and understanding the moment you're in and kind of appreciating what you have. You got to have a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, I think, is the healthy approach. And that's something I've started to kind of work on throughout the years too, because I most of my 20s were spent doing the same thing. Like, I got to go find the next thing, got to move to the next thing. This is too safe. Let's take the risk. But like now I'm starting to kind of process like, okay, slow down a little bit. You're here. Appreciate that too.
Yep, for sure.
But I mean, you mentioned these are the good old days, and you're coming off a big moment. You got to work on the most successful Blumhouse film of all time. It just broke the record this weekend, I saw.
Right. It's crazy.
You were the puppeteer for Five Nights at Freddy's. You were Freddy himself.
I was, and that was amazing. And I have to say, I didn't realize how much of an honor it was at the time when I accepted the role. But now, having seen the movie and having talked, I've been talking to the fan base online. People have been, asking me a lot of questions, asking me for autographs and things like that, which I'm perfectly happy to do. But I didn't realize how much of a following it really had until I was a part of it. And then I was like, wow, it's amazing. It's crazy. I can't believe how well it did. Also considering that it was on Peacock, or it still is on Peacock. The whole day and date release, I was afraid that that was going to really hurt the box office, and it didn't seem to, because $80 million opening weekend was amazing, and
Yeah.
I'm seeing like Disney movies and Marvel movies and things like that, which are not even getting half of that for their opening weekends, and it's the whole thing is amazing. I just feel so lucky to be a part of it.
And it's, you know, the fandom is so huge too. Like you're coming upon a massive, like just before I got on with you, actually, I was on the phone with a friend of mine back in Maine, and I mentioned like, well, I was like, I gotta go. I have an interview with this guy, and I was telling him, he's like, wait a minute, hold on, let me put you on the phone with my son. Massive Freddy fan. He was like, you're talking, yeah, he was freaking out about it. Like, yeah, you're just coming upon such a massive franchise, and you know, one of the things I loved about the movie too is not just the fact that like they did a great job adapting it, but that it was all mostly done with practical.
Yeah,
which
pretty much
rare.
everything was practical.
Love that.
There were a few shots where they added like fake electricity, or at one point Cupcake opens his mouth and you see these teeth inside his mouth, and those weren't actually there on set. But I would say 98% of it was all practical. Of course, there's probably some hardworking computer animators out there who worked on the movie who
of course
made it look, who did things so well that I couldn't even tell myself that it was CG. But almost everything that we saw in the movie I remember shooting. So yeah,
that's beautiful. You don't see that as much with major releases these days.
Right.
Is it done practically? That was really refreshing to see.
Sure. You know, puppetry is so interesting. Live theater still uses a lot of puppetry because they haven't quite figured out a way to, you know, have a fake rabbit or a fake, you know, whatever on stage yet. Or I'm sorry, like a real rabbit, or so very often you have to have puppetry to portray those characters. But in film and television, puppetry is now a choice, the way that stop motion is a choice. Back in the day, if you wanted an E.T. or a Gremlin in a movie, it had to be a puppet because there was no other way to do it. Then Jurassic Park came out in '93 and proved that you can do this with CG and make it look amazing. And I have lots of friends who are CG artists, and they work their butts off, and they do an amazing job. So now puppetry has become a choice, and you have things like The Mandalorian and the Star Wars sequels that came out over the last 10 years or so that choose to use real puppets, practical effects. And then Freddy's was a big one. And Emma Tommy, who's our director, and Jason Blum were really determined that they wanted these things to be real. They wanted them to be there for the actors to touch, for the audience to know that these are something real, that is tangible, that you can hold, that you can hug, that can hurt you. And I was part of the build team at Jim Henson's Creature Shop, which every time I think about that, it's still like it's another dream come true. I always knew I wanted to build puppets, and I always knew I wanted to work for Jim Henson, and to be a part of that team at the Creature Shop that brought these characters to life. It's so humbling to be able to say that. And I was able to see them from the design phase to the model phase, to our mock-ups, and then to, you know, final fruition. And that was all led by Bobby Bennett, who is an amazing artist, an amazing puppet builder. And he was determined with this movie. He didn't want any cheats. He didn't feel like we had to have cheats. There's no reason why Freddy can't look exactly like Freddy. So what they actually did was Scott Cawthon sent us the files from the games. Sent us the files. They printed them out in 3D models. And then Bobby made minor adjustments to make sure that we could fit a person in there for the times when there would need to be a suit performer. And that wasn't all the time. Very often it was a full animatronic, a full robot that you were watching. Mainly for scenes when the characters were walking, is when the stunt performers were inside the suits. But he didn't want any cheats, and he wanted to make sure that that was the real Freddy you saw in there, not a version of Freddy. So, and I'm proud to say that I think that we achieved that. I think they came out amazing.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, if you don't mind kind of getting into the nitty gritty of it all, I used to work for the Stan Winston guys. I'm such a huge practical effects guy. Like, can you kind of take me through the process of building these and kind of how they were, how they were brought to life and controlled, like the technical aspects.
So I can't speak for the robotics, for the animatronics. That was done also at the Creature Shop in another room, in the animatronic room, and that's led by a man named John Criswell, who's been with Henson for many, many years. I want to say he started working there during Dinosaurs.
Oh, wow.
In 1990s, shortly after Jim Henson passed. And his team, Wolfgang Criswell and Barton Gilly and John Biggs and a bunch of other people who actually did the robotics. And that, I couldn't even begin to explain to you how they do it.
Fair enough.
It's still a mystery to me. I would just go in every day and check it out and say, could I play with it? And they would teach me how to do the different things. As far as the fabrication goes, I was part of the foam fabrication team.
Okay.
And what we did was we took those models that were printed out, and like a lot of people do, we taped them off. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it's we take a model and we take little tiny pieces of tape and put it over the different sections of the model. So let's say Freddy's arm. We would put a little piece of tape over it until the whole thing is covered with tape. Okay? Then we would take Mod Podge, put it over that to sort of solidify the tape so that becomes one form. Okay? Then we slice the tape off, and there's our pattern now. Okay? So now we're able to slice that tape off and lay it flat. So now it looks like some crazy W, essentially, that lays down on a sheet. We blow that up like 300% or whatever the percentage was that we needed for, for an 8-foot animatronic. And then we rebuild that shape in foam.
Okay.
And now we have an exact replica of what we just, taped off, that big. And I don't think, I'm not giving away any trade secrets. You'll find a lot of YouTubers who do that. And in fact, one of our main builders on this, his name is Jack Kendall. He was 20 years old when he started on this project. He's only 21 now because it was only last year. But he learned everything he knows from YouTube. And he came into the shop and he showed his portfolio of the things he had made. And everyone was so amazed. And they hired him. And he became one of our lead builders. He built a lot of Freddy's pieces, a lot of Bonnie's pieces and things like that. And he's just a whiz. It's amazing. And he learned everything on YouTube, which I think is so cool and
wild,
and hopefully should be so inspirational for kids today that they could go onto something like YouTube and learn how to build like the pros do, because if you keep it up, you'll be one of those pros one day.
That's crazy. And you can really access anything you want these days.
Yeah.
And I mean, even like the Winston guys now have the Stan Winston School, the online, you can learn all that stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And kind of, I guess kind of take us through like what your day on set was like. Like, so when approaching puppeteering Freddy, what were your controls? Like, what was the process of bringing him to life?
Okay. So we would control him with these little controllers. They look sort of like PlayStation controllers, but I believe they're actually made for model airplanes.
Oh, wow.
And they have different toggles and switches and wheels on the back. And so I would be completely in control of Freddy's head. So I was able to turn the head, was able to open his mouth, blink, look left and right, eyebrows up and down, ears up and down. Anything that had to do with his face or his emotions is what I controlled. And then when he was fully animatronic, which was quite often, there would be another puppeteer that would have a similar control, and that control would control his arms, any waist that the characters might have, the hands, wrists, things like that. The one thing that these characters did not have, except for Foxy, was leg movement, which is why they brought in the stunt team, a very talented bunch of performers. And for the scenes when the characters needed to walk or needed to do something where they needed to travel, from one side of the screen to the other, then the stunt performer would come in, they'd put the suit on and an animatronic head. So the puppeteers were still in control of the faces and the emotions for the entirety of the film, which was good because there was a consistency, and we were able to just really hone our performance and figure out how our characters reacted to different things like that.
And what was kind of the process that you and your fellow puppeteers took for giving each of these characters their own personality?
So we all played the games. I have to honestly say, I don't think any of us were huge fans of the game before. Not that we had played it and we didn't like it. We just had not played it. Most of us are pushing 50. So we just had not played the game. But once we were cast, we sort of did a deep dive. We read a lot of things. We went online, played some of the games, watched a lot of YouTube videos about the lore, figured out how these characters move, why they are the way they are. Okay, so these are animatronics that have children inside of them, so they should have some amount of childlike wonder. They should have some type of childish movements, but then at some point they become these murderers. So they have to be able to switch on a dime. So, for instance, the scene with the where they're building the fort. So that's I always think of that as those are the kids being kids. They're playing with Abby. They're building a fort. They're being silly. Bonnie falls over, and they're doing things that you would expect to see a kid do when they're building a fort like that. But you have to be able to switch because you can't give that same level of emotion and silliness when the characters have to be scary. And a lot of it, what was really interesting is, as puppeteers, we're used to being big. Okay, we're used to doing Muppet type characters. We work for the Jim Henson Company. Most of us work for the Muppets or Sesame Street. And we're used to doing these big, gregarious, loud characters. And in this case, we had to pull it back. We had to pull our performance back. And that was really thanks to Emma Tommy, our director, and Scott Cawthon, the creator, who would say, that's a little too far, or Freddy wouldn't do this, or, Chica, that's too smiley for Chica, make her a little bit more sinister. So we would do multiple takes, as you do with any movie. So very often Emma would let us do our first take the way that maybe we thought we should do it. And sometimes that was great. And then sometimes she would say, no, I needed to pull you back. Let's just have one or two blinks here. I want the character to be more stoic. And that was fine, because really what we wanted to do was we wanted to honor the games. We wanted to honor the fans. Jason Blum was on one of the late night shows, and he said, I know the promotional department's going to kill me, but we made this movie for the fans. And we did. We really did make this for the fans. It's pretty much all we talked about. And they were like, let's make the movie the way it's supposed to be made. Let's make it for the fans the way that they expect it to be. And if regular people like it, that's great. And if we do justice to the story and the lore, they will like it. And they have. I think we ended with 87 or 88% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah.
Which was great, because we were really scared at first. The critics scores came in and they were super low. And then we were like, wait, who are these critics? And most of the critics are older people who maybe are not familiar with the franchise, and
right.
And most horror movies get pretty bad reviews in the first place because people see them as frivolous, and which I think is ridiculous because I'm a huge fan, right? So anyway, so the audience wound up liking it, And when we finally saw the movie, and we saw the movie the day after the reviews came out, we were like, they didn't see the same movie we saw. And it wasn't because I was a part of the movie I felt that way, because I've worked on projects that turn out awful. Not a lot of them, but sometimes you're working on something, and when you finally watch it, you're like, that is a stinker. And I've really learned to like separate my experience on set working on it and my experience with the final product, so that I can be realistic about it. There are shows where, and I won't say what show it is, but there was one show I worked on.
Fair enough.
Which was, we had the worst on-set experience. The celebrity that we were working with was just an awful individual to work with. And we would all go home every night saying, I hope I never have to go back there. And then when it came out, it did gangbusters and everybody loved it. And they were like, this is like an Oscar-winning, Emmy-winning thing. And we were like, great. Glad everyone likes it. But I hope I never have to go back there.
I've certainly had those. And you had mentioned, you said you were kind of new to the world of Freddy's, but before we started rolling, you mentioned that your son was a big fan of Freddy's. What was that kind of like, breaking it to him that you were involved in this? And you said you actually got to bring him on set.
Yeah. So normally I come home and I'm like, hey, I got a job. Like, what are you working on? Oh, I'm working on this. And my kids are like, oh, that's cool. But I sort of planned it out. I came home and I said, hey, I'm going to be working on this movie. Have you ever heard of it? It's called Five Nights at Freddy's. And my son was like, what? What? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, wait a second, you're working on it? And I was like, yeah. He's like, it's going to be a movie like in the movie theaters? It's like, yeah. He's like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm playing this character called Freddy Fazbear. And he's like, you're playing Freddy? You're like, are you going to do his voice? I was like, I don't think he talks. Right. He doesn't talk. Wait, so you're going to be, could I come? Could I come watch you do the movie? I was like, I don't know. We'll talk about it. We'll figure it out. So I finally was cool to my kids. My 14-year-old daughter is not as into it as my son is, but she has a lot of friends who are. And now, since she's seen the movie, she's a lot more into it. But yeah, so the cool thing is that our final day of shooting was the big scene inside the restaurant when Mike puts the tape into the VCR. And you see the old video of the woman saying, hey, you're new to Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. This is a great place for kids to play and blah, 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 blah. So my kids are actually in that video. I won't say what they did just because my wife would kill me. Like,
totally fair.
Identify our children. But they got a pretty good close-up moment, and they had a great time. When we got to set that morning and my son walked into the restaurant for the first time, I could just see his face, and he was like, oh my God, this is so cool. It looks like a real restaurant. And it did. And one of the things that was unique about this set compared to other sets that I'd worked on was that rather than being built as like separate rooms and separate places on the soundstage, this was built as a complete restaurant, meaning that the kitchen was connected to the dining area. All the hallways that you saw like Bonnie and Chica walking in were on the outskirts of the restaurant, all connected. Wow. So you literally like walked in and out of the doors and you were in these different sections, which was super cool.
Well, that's really
normally with movie making and TV shows, the bedroom is on this sound stage and the kitchen is three sound stages over, and they have no relation and they don't have ceilings, or they only have three walls. And this was a complete place. Like, seriously, had they wanted to start serving food in this place, they could have done that. It wouldn't have been a problem because it was so
rare. Right? Was the whole place built like on like a massive sound stage, I take it?
It was built in a Lowe's.
Interesting.
So yeah, we shot in New Orleans, and there was an old Lowe's that was adapted to be a soundstage. And I made a joke when we got there. I was like, well, I guess we'll never stop improving. But but it was fun. It was super fun.
You know, one of the things I guess you're kind of talking about both your work in Freddy's and you've worked, you know, at Disney. It really kind of speaks to the versatility of puppetry. You know, some people can be charmed by them, some people can be terrified by them. It really speaks to, you know, the beauty of this art form that you're with. I mean, what do you think puppeteering kind of brings to the genre of horror, and why so many horror movies in the past have, you know, you mentioned Gremlins and E.T. all the way up through, you know, Puppet Master and Dead Silence. Like, puppets have a big foothold in horror. What do you think kind of brings to that?
They do. And I think a big part of the reason is, I mean, practically in a lot of horror movies, characters are not humanoid. Sometimes they are, but often, you know, you have something like Gremlins, or in the case of Chucky, who of course is humanoid, but he's so small.
Right.
You want something like a puppet, and you want sort of that uncanny valley in a way, where it's alive and it looks alive, but it's just not quite right. And while that could be really disturbing on something like I've seen these like fake like Japanese they almost look like news reporters, where they have these fake mouths, and they're fully animatronic, and they talk, and they're almost like a telemarketer or something. And that looks weird and uncanny and sort of scary in a way. So I think it automatically starts you in a scary sort of mood, or you're looking at something saying, I don't know, that's kind of funky looking. Because you look at Chucky and you think, well, that doesn't look like a kid. You know, I mean, it sort of looks like a kid, but like a really ugly kid.
Yeah.
So it allows you to do things that, you know, a person couldn't. Of course, nowadays CG can do it also, but there's just something about that real tactile ability to, you know, pick up a gremlin and throw it into the fire. And you really see the reaction on the actress's face. Yeah, a friend of mine, Russ Walco, who was Foxy in the movie, he was in this movie called Come Play. And there's this character called Larry, really big, tall, lanky thing. They shot it in Canada. And it's just amazing because this thing was really there. It was really casting shadows, and it was really interacting with the child. And I don't know. I mean, it's seeing the reactions on the actors and actresses' faces that you're working with. Sometimes I say we're not only puppeteering the character, we're puppeteering the reactions of the people we're working with. We are manipulating those reactions. When I worked on the Jungle Book, one of the reasons they used puppets, and ultimately we were replaced with CG, and we knew that we would be, but on set, they wanted to have puppets that Neil, the little boy who played Mowgli, could interact with. Because what they really wanted more than anything was his real legitimate reactions. So Jon Favreau would say to me, okay, I need you to make him smile. I need you to make him laugh, or, you know, make him sad, yell at him or something like that. And he wasn't talking about the puppet. He was talking about Neil. So he wanted me to manipulate the kid.
Yeah.
So, and I would do that through the puppet. So it was really interesting. And I guess, you know, puppeteers get a bad rap. It's like they're so manipulative and they control you. I'm not your puppet. I was talking to someone recently and they said, how come puppeteers are always the bad guys on movies?
Yeah.
And it's because of that whole manipulation thing. You see like the Godfather poster, which is like the marionette strings, where he's manipulating people.
Elm Street with Freddy Krueger doing
sure. But yeah, puppets can be scary, and they can also be cute. You know, it just really depends.
Yeah.
Depends on what you're going for. Um, you know, Jim Henson certainly made things that were super cute. You look at Elmo or Kermit or any of those characters, and they're lovable, and kids right away want to talk to them and hug them because they're tactile. There's something that they can actually touch.
Hmm.
But then he also did things like the Dark Crystal or the Storyteller.
Right.
And those were puppets, and those were scary. I mean, if you walked into your house and one of those was standing at the end of your hallway, you'd run the other way.
For sure.
You know? So I don't know if I answered the question too well, but
Oh, absolutely.
You know, puppets are there. They're actually there. And I think that's really big for a director, for the human actors who have to interact with them. It's less pretending on their part, and you're literally part of the cast. I mean, when we were performing, we were, it's in the credits, we're under cast because we are literally Freddy, we are Bonnie, we are Chica, we are Foxy. Just like any other actor.
Of course. And you touched on kind of, puppeteering the actors in a way, kind of coming back to Freddy's. What was it like kind of partnering with those actors? What were their, what was your interaction like with them?
It was really cool. Josh Hutcherson was great. He was like so game for anything, and he was very friendly. He was on our plane coming home back from New Orleans when the shoot was over, and just chatted, and super cool guy. But you could see that there were times when he was actually intimidated by the puppets.
Right.
Especially when there was a stunt performer like walking towards him. We did the one shot, I want to say it's when Abby first introduces him to them and is like, "These are my friends," and Freddy walks up to him and sort of like eyes him up and down, and Josh is not a tall guy. He's probably about 5.5 feet tall, and Freddy is just about 8 feet, and he has this giant head, and he gets right up in there, and I'm manipulating the eyes and the different expressions as the stunt performer is moving forward, and that's scary. I mean, look, think about when you go to like Disneyland and you like meet a Disney villain like the Big Bad Wolf or Jafar or something like that, and it's most people have had that experience that they can relate to and say, okay, I get you. It's a giant head that's coming toward you in a menacing way.
Right.
So we got those reactions out of the actors. We were a little concerned with Piper, the little girl who played Abby, that she would be afraid of them, and she wasn't, and that was great.
Nice.
They had brought her into the creature shop a couple of months early, and she was there when we were still building stuff, so she was able to see how the characters worked, and I made sure to befriend her, and then she saw Freddy there, and you could see she was sort of like eyeing him like, how does this work? And I was like, here. And I handed her the controller. I was like, you ever play PlayStation before? And she was like, yeah. I was like, here, play with the buttons. And then there she was playing with the buttons, and she was understanding, okay, got it, this moves the head up and down, this turns the head, this blinks the eyes, this opens the mouth and the ears and stuff like that. And once she was able to sort of control the puppet in a way, I think it put her at ease a little bit.
Definitely.
And then they became literally like her friends. Like what you see in the movie is pretty much the way that it was in real life. She would come to set and she would hug the animatronics, and we'd always have to be careful because they're on these stands. We want to make sure that it doesn't tip over,
right?
Because they are metal. They're made of metal. Not the outer sections, but inside it's robotics. It's the same. They're a Terminator inside, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
So we want to make sure it doesn't fall on top of her.
Oh, definitely.
But, she would come and she would hug Foxy and stuff like that. And we'd have to make sure we were on the arms at that point so we can make the arms go around her.
Oh, it's so wholesome.
Things like that. Yeah, it was pretty great. There are pictures online of her hugging Golden Freddy, which was one of our first puppet nights. I play Golden Freddy as well. Any of the bears I play Freddy, I play Golden Freddy, and then I play the torture chair that both the security guard and Josh Hutcherson interacted with in the movie.
Oh, very cool.
But yeah, and she would just hug him and stuff like that. And the funny thing, that was a super windy night. So what you don't see in that shot is that we had all these tethers connected to Golden Freddy, and we had some of the puppet wranglers below the frame holding it to make sure that when the wind would blow, that Golden Freddy wouldn't shake back and forth, because that's not as intimidating if suddenly you're
right.
So yeah, so that was pretty fun.
Oh, that's super cool. It's so nice to hear that, like, she really took to those too.
Yeah, she did, and she's
I'm
great.
sure that was a concern. You could go either way.
Sure, yeah. I mean, because if you have your star actually afraid of her co-stars, that could be a problem. Even if it's a horror movie, and she's supposed to be afraid, you still want her to be able to be cooperative, and she couldn't have been any better. I mean, she was just amazing, and her mom was there all the time, and they're such a nice family. So we were very fortunate, and hope we get to work with her again.
And speaking of being afraid of co-stars, this film contributed another great entry into the Matthew Lillard horror canon. Did you get to work with him at all?
I did, yeah. He's so cool. And for me, I always think of him as Shaggy.
Yeah.
Because, I grew up in the 80s, watched Scooby-Doo all the time. So then in the late 90s when they did the live action, and he was Shaggy, and he's so good, such a good Shaggy. By the way, sometimes he does Shaggy's voice now in some of the newer cartoons. So
yeah, I love that.
A full circle thing, which is fun. But so that was super awesome to meet him, and of course I remembered him from the first Scream. But he was great. He was so good, and he was so into it, and he was so friendly, and he knew everybody's name. And we did the scene where Cupcake bites his stomach, and I was actually holding Cupcake for that. Brett O'Quinn, who portrays Cupcake, was doing Cupcake's blinks and that stuff right off camera. I was in a green suit, and so the idea was that I just sort of walked Matthew through it, that okay, so I'm going to come up to you with Cupcake. He's going to bite you on the side. At that point, you're going to grab him, and you're essentially going to puppeteer Cupcake at that point, as if he's biting you. And he got it right away. So, I came, I put it on there. He grabbed it and then did like, oh my gosh. And of course, that's him moving it around.
Yeah.
And it turned out great. And to his credit, he was sick that day. He wasn't feeling well. That was like right after COVID had ended. So, of course, we were concerned, like, is he okay? Does he have COVID? He didn't. I think he just had a pretty bad cold. You could actually hear it in his voice when he's yelling at the animatronics at the end, when he's like, all of you nasty creatures, what you've turned into. You could, if you listen to it again, you can hear the hoarseness in his voice.
Look how small you are, how worthless you are. You are wretched, rotten little beast. I made you.
But he was a trooper, he was there. He did it. He didn't complain. It was not a thing. He was such a pleasure to work with, and he was scary. I mean, when he's coming through that entrance and he's sort of like creeping off to the side like that. My understanding is that initially he was just going to walk through the entrance, but he was so tall that the ears were going to hit. So they had to sort of figure out a way to get him through that archway. And he came up with like this crouch as he walked through. And it was so scary. Like being on the other side of that entranceway and seeing him come towards us.
Oh, yeah.
It's super scary. And it's funny because they say, horror movies are the most fun movies to make, and there are a lot of laughs and stuff like that. And there were a lot of laughs. But sometimes it's actually scary when you're watching it. You're like, oh my goodness.
Oh, sure.
And you're there in the room with these things. So, yeah, I mean, I can't say enough good stuff about him. He came to the Creature Shop when we were doing his fitting. And the Creature Shop years ago had done a Scooby-Doo stand-in for the Scooby-Doo movie. And basically what it was for the animators and for Matthew to interact with. And it was just a statue, but it looked exactly like the one from the movie. And then they would take the statue out, and Matthew would do the scene without the statue. But now he knew like how tall Scooby was supposed to be and stuff like that. Anyway, we had that at the creature shop. So as soon as we walked in, he was like, "Zoinks! Oh my God!" Scooby! And then some of the builders, we have pictures of him in his Springtrap costume like this, standing next to Scooby. He was such a good sport. And he was like, "You guys have this out all the time. You brought it just for me." And Pete, my boss, was like, "Well, we brought him out just for you." He's like, "Where do you keep him?" It's like, "Oh, in the attic." It's like, "You keep my little buddy in the attic?" It was really sweet. It was really fun. Such a cool guy.
I love that.
Yeah.
I would nerd out so hard around him.
Sure.
Both growing up with Scooby-Doo and loving Scream movies, and now this. Yeah, I'm glad to hear he's a cool dude.
He's awesome.
And minus kind of working with the actors, do you have any favorite kind of behind the scenes moments or stories from shooting this film?
My favorite scene that we shot was the scene where Freddy bites the girl in half. And it's all done through shadow puppetry.
Cool moment.
So what we did was we set up Freddy. So you see him for real when she like steps on the chair and she like gets up to look inside his mouth. And then the hand comes out, and the hand is not the hand of a child. Actually, it's the hand of Jack, the guy I was telling you about earlier, the 20-year-old builder, because he's a smaller guy.
Gotcha.
And then the rest was done essentially with shadow puppetry, where we set up a light, we set up Freddy, so that we had a nice profile silhouette, and we had a stunt woman on a rig. We wanted to make sure we got her shadow really nice, and you see the shadow go in, and you see him chomp her, and then they would drop her, and then that's where the CG artists came in, and they deleted the rest of the front of that shadow, so it looks like she was dropped in half.
Gotcha.
But yeah, and that was super cool. That was a stunt woman, I believe her name is Taryn Terrell, and she was a wrestler.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so that was my favorite scene. We did a lot of really fun stuff. A lot of the cupcake stuff required multiple people. I was actually when Cupcake is biting on the grate, he's inside the grate when the guy has his back up against it. So I was inside the grate with Cupcake, while Brett, the cupcake puppeteer, was controlling the eyes and mouth and stuff right off camera. And that was super fun because they actually like set up the pyro so that we'd have the real sparks and stuff like that.
Nice.
And that was super fun. Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing shoot, and we were so fortunate to be a part of it. And I just can't say enough what a good time we had. And we were in New Orleans, which most of us had never been to before. So we got to taste the food and do Mardi Gras things. And,
nice.
That was just so amazing. It was
I bet. One of my favorite studios.
Yeah.
Very cool. I mean, how long was the shoot, or how many nights did you spend at Freddy's to make it a bad joke?
Right. We got there in the middle of January, and we shot until April 4th, I believe it was.
Oh yeah, so you were right there.
Yeah. So we were there for quite a while. We had a short break in between for a week while they were shooting some human stuff. Puppeteers call anything that doesn't have puppets in it human stuff. They were shooting some human stuff. I don't know, people were in it. Yeah, but we were there for the long haul, and it was great. It started to get super hot in April, which is funny because you don't expect for it to get hot that early. But yeah, so it'll be interesting. I'm curious if we shoot a second movie, and everyone keeps asking me. We have no information. There was this weird thing online today from some Hollywood Handle or something like that, talking
Hmm.
about, oh, the sequel's been greenlit and they're already working on it, and here are pictures of this and that. And it's like, I've never heard of the Hollywood Handle before.
Yeah, a lot of
Right.
fake news reporting out there.
Yeah, and I could tell you that we would know before the Hollywood Handle would know. So,
You know, there's so much. I'll tell you a great example. So I just flew back from New England a couple
Okay.
weeks ago, and I swung by the set of Beetlejuice 2, and there
Right.
was a guy who came to set, just a fan, wore the Beetlejuice costume, and like one picture that made it online, and now all the horror sites, they're like, first photos of Michael Keaton from the set of Beetlejuice 2. I'm like, guys, that was a fan. He was there,
Right.
but like that, no one checks anymore. Like no one
Right.
checks there. Yeah,
It's funny.
film reporting is such a mess.
And the thing is look, the movie did really well. I expect there to be a sequel.
I'm
and
sure.
I expect
Yeah.
them to announce it soon, hopefully. I'll learn about it the same time you guys do. And then these sites will be like, see, we told you.
Yeah.
You're saying something, you're reporting something that's probable anyway. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's really easy to say.
It's a
See, our
safe
scoop was
bet.
right. They're
Yeah.
making a second movie.
It's not a gamble.
That's like if I was like, newsflash, they're making a new Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
Well, I told you, I was right. They're
Yeah.
making a new one. So anyway, that's just
It's
me.
safe to roll the dice. Well, I'm sure it's a matter of time. This film is done incredible. It's got the fan base. There was, a little bit of a tease there with the "I always come back" thing, and the fans were like,
Right.
I got you. So I'm sure it is a matter of time, and I hope you'll get involved with that as well.
I hope so too.
And kind of moving, I want to move away from Freddy's a little bit to ask a couple
Sure.
more questions about just kind of your career in general.
Yeah,
Which thank you for all those, by the way.
of course.
When kind of researching you and your career, one of the things that immediately stuck out to me, because I grew up in, I was born in the 80s. I'm a 90s kid. Like, I adore Pee-Wee Herman, the late great Paul Rubens, and I saw that you actually got to work with him once. You were Cherry at one point.
I was.
Please tell me everything about this.
Yeah, so the original Cherry was played by a woman named Allison Mork, and amazing. She's a friend of mine. And when the show came along, so what I was a part of was the Pee-Wee Herman show here in Los Angeles. There was a live show back in 2010, I believe it was. And Allison wasn't available to do it. And I was part of the team building the puppets, and they asked me if I would perform Sherry. So I had called her and checked with her, see how she felt about that. And she was like, absolutely, go for it, which was so nice to have her blessing. And yeah, so we got to work with Pee-Wee, Paul. We worked with him from December, I want to say, through March of that year. 2009 to 2010, whatever it was. But he was awesome. He was amazing. They say never meet your heroes, but that is one of those situations where I was so fortunate to meet one of my heroes, because he was exactly what you wanted him to be.
Awesome.
And he was kind, and he knew everybody's name, and anyone he spoke to felt like they were the most important person in the room. And I'm not saying this because he passed, because I've said this for years. He was so kind, and I'm not going to make believe like I was his best friend. I worked with him for 3 or 4 months, and I was fortunate to spend every day with him. And because I was playing Cherry, I felt like we had a little bit of an extra bond, which was nice. He would always come out before the show. He'd sit on the chair's lap, talk to me, check on me, make sure I was okay, see if I needed anything, make sure I was not too hot. He was really big into, he didn't like to sweat because he would wear so much makeup for Pee-Wee.
Right.
So he would have the stage be so cold, which was great for me because I was inside this giant foam chair.
Right.
Under these huge stage lights. So he would check on me every day. And it was always like an open door policy with him, if you want to go down to his dressing room to shoot the shit, or sorry, I don't know if I can say
Oh, it's fine. We're R-rated.
Got it. Or just ask him questions or have something signed for your mom or whatever. He was so cool, and he would mess with us, which is so funny.
Oh yeah.
He was so used to people telling him these long-winded stories and stuff like that, and he would have, the way he would deal with it is you would be like talking to him and he would be like, uh-huh, 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 until like he got like this big face and you were like, and he'd be like, I love that story, and he would jump up and like run away, and like literally like run away. And you couldn't help but laugh. Like, you're partly embarrassed because you're like, oh my God, I must have been boring him out of his mind. But you couldn't help but laugh because he was so himself.
Love that.
And another funny story, when we were first started rehearsal, Alex Timbers directed it. Alex Timbers is a huge Broadway director, who I'm very fortunate to be able to call my friend. I've actually worked with him on a Muppet Broadway thing also. But anyway, so Alex was a director for that, and he had set up the room all good for us, and Paul came in and we would start rehearsing, and then one day we're doing our thing and you start to hear like this high pitch, like, and we're all like, what is that? And Paul's like, do you hear that? We're like, yeah. And he's like, I can't do this. We need to find that sound. So we're all walking around the room looking for this sound, this high-pitched sound. And we think maybe it's the recording equipment, maybe it's whatever. So you have literally like 20 people walking around the room trying to find the sound. And after we do this for like 5 minutes, Paul busts out laughing. And he had this noisemaker in his pocket that he would press to make this irritating sound.
Yeah.
And of course we couldn't find out where it was because he was moving with the rest of us looking for this sound. So he would mess with us like that, and
great.
We thought that was funny. And one of the things that I still do today, I learned from him, which was super fun. He very successful and had made a lot of money over time. So he would always buy things. He would go on vacation, he would buy this and he would buy that. And he said he bought so much stuff that he couldn't possibly keep it all in his house. So most of his stuff was in storage units. He said he had like 8 storage units full of like all his stuff that he had bought over the years.
Wow.
And all he had, because he would never go to these storage units, all he had were pictures of these things. So when he wanted to see one of his things that he missed, he would go on his computer and open a file and look at the picture of that thing. And him and I were talking about collecting one day, and he said, yeah, I don't buy anything anymore. I'm like, oh, why? And he explained to me because he had so much and it's all in storage. And he's like, yeah, so now I just see pictures of my stuff. So now when I want something, I just go online, I find a picture of it, and I drag that picture into my folder, and it's just like I have it. And we're like, oh my God, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Because I see that just as much as I see my real stuff. So now, because I'm a big collector, I collect action figures and all sorts of junk.
Oh, same.
So now I tell myself, is this something that I really want, like on a shelf, or would I be happy just having a picture of it that I could look at on my computer? So I thought that was hilarious. But yeah,
I'm sure Liza would prefer I stick to pictures for some of the things.
Right. But he was so fun to work with, and he really was the real deal. And
Beautiful.
He worked really hard to make sure that he took the people with him who had gotten him to where he was. So John Paragon, who played, now I'm drawing a blank, Zombie, who played Zombie, came back to play Zombie for the show, and a bunch of the other actors who had played in the original show had come back, because he wanted everyone to be a part of it, and he talked about doing movies, and at that point, that was before he did the movie for Netflix. So we knew that was happening, and then there were some Playhouse movies that he wanted to do, and I would not be surprised if those movies still happen, because my understanding is that they got his blessing to go on and to continue on with the character. So my hope is that happens, and I don't know if it's a matter of them doing sort of a cartoon version of him, or if it's recasting the character with a new actor, or he loved crazy stuff. So I would not be surprised if he signed off on some crazy AI version of himself.
It's not out of the question these days.
Right. That would do the movie and look ridiculous on purpose. Because he just liked doing silly stuff like that. Even like in this last movie he did, he used that system to make himself look young, and they like pulled his skin back for all the shots. So if you see like behind the scenes shots, you see all this tape on his face and stuff like that. And he didn't try to hide it at all. He would tell every talk show he'd go on, he would tell people, oh yeah, they put all sorts of tape on my face and stuff to try to make me look young, because Pee-wee's a young character. No one wants to see my old self playing him. But one thing he did say to me was, and maybe this information is out there already, I don't know, but he had said, if I could see anyone playing the Pee-wee character, it would be Jim Parsons from Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, anyone could.
Yeah, so I would not be surprised if something like that happens, and there's a Pee-wee for a new generation.
Although, in the Weird Al movie they did, Yorma from The Lonely Island played Pee-wee, and he did a great job.
Okay, I haven't seen that. I definitely want to see it because I love Weird Al.
Well, how's this for a pivot? You also worked with Weird Al.
I did. I worked with Weird Al on his Polka Face video. We shot it on the Jim Henson Company lot, and the video had a bunch of different segments in it, and I believe, if I remember correctly, they were all fan created. So there were a bunch of different fans who came up with segments that they sent in to him, and he approved it. And a friend of mine, Victor Yared, who's a puppeteer, had come up with the segment, and it had gotten approved. So I was one of the builders on it, and then I puppeteered one of the Yeti characters for the video. And Al came in when we shot. He was there for a good part of the day. I did get to meet him and talk to him a little bit. Super nice guy, very humble, pretty quiet. And then he had to go somewhere. I don't remember where he was going, but I remember he got into his car, which was parked on the lot, and then one of the people had wanted to take a picture with him and didn't have a chance to, so they chased after his car, and he stopped the car, and he got out, and he took a picture with them, and he was totally nice, and he was so appreciative that, that people wanted to, support him and loved him and his performance and stuff like that. And super nice guy. Yeah, I can't say I spent a lot of time with him. I didn't, but it was a fun experience for sure.
That's great. I mean, you've worked with so many of my favorites. Like and you mentioned you did a little work with the Muppets as well. I don't.
Sure.
What could you touch on for that?
Yeah. So with the Muppets, when Disney purchased the Muppets in 2004, they had decided at that point that they wanted to have multiple versions of the characters. And some people agreed with that and some people didn't, but Disney, as the owners, decided that's what they wanted to do. So they held this audition in New York, Los Angeles, and Canada, I believe. I think they auditioned about 500 people. They picked 4 of us to come in and do a workshop for Kermit. And I was one of them, which I was very fortunate and it was amazing to be able to perform that puppet and have it on my hand and stuff. Yeah, so we did 2 weeks of rehearsal, and then we were off for a couple of months. We came back for another week or so of rehearsal. And that was in 2006. And then I didn't hear from them for years. And then in 2009, they called me, and they were like, hey, so we never followed up with you after those auditions, but it was you. You got it. I was like, oh, okay, great. Can you beat a CBS in 2 hours? And I was like, yeah, sure. This was like 2 days before my daughter was born.
Oh, wow.
So my wife is like, what's the matter? What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? She could see the look on my face. And I sat down and I cried because this was something I had practiced since I was very little. So I got to perform Kermit on a few different appearances. They were dealing with some staffing issues at the time, which is why they brought me in. They were all union jobs, in case anyone was questioning. People had questioned if I came in because I was working non-union and the other performer didn't want to do the non-union jobs, but that wasn't the case. They were all union jobs. So I got to perform Kermit for a few different appearances. I was on America's Got Talent. I was on the MTV Video Music Awards with Lady Gaga, which was super fun.
I totally remember that.
Yeah, she was very sweet. And it was funny because I was in the limo with Kermit and the head of Muppets at the time. And we stopped and we picked up Gaga, and she got into the limo with us. And then I started talking to her as myself to introduce myself, but she only wanted to talk to Kermit. And then she proceeded to talk to Kermit for about 45 minutes while we waited for our turn to get out of the limo for the cameras and stuff like that, which was hilarious. And she could not have been sweeter. So that was super fun. And then a few years later, I got a call from Disney Theatrical, which is the Broadway leg of the Disney company. And Thomas Schumacher and Alex Timbers, who had directed the Pee-Wee Herman show, were putting together a test for the Muppet Show on Broadway. Mm-hmm. And so I went and I did this test, which was about a week long. We had 80 puppets. There were 8 puppeteers. Excuse me. We all did the voices of our characters that we were playing. I played all of Jim Henson's characters, Kermit and Waldorf, and trying to remember who else I did. That was super fun. And what they had done was they invited all of the different divisions of Disney to come to watch our performance. We wound up doing a 15-minute performance after the week was over to show that it could be done on Broadway. So I got a call from them. The show had been picked up, and they wanted me to be the puppet captain on it. And I would open the show in New York as Kermit, and then we would essentially travel the world, opening up different shows of it. Sorry for lack of a better term. So basically there was going to be one in Germany, I believe, and some other places, and I was going to sort of work with the puppeteers and get them up to speed. But that was great, and I had a contract, and we actually started development on it. And then shortly after that, Muppets Most Wanted came out and did not do well at the box office at all. And then it went away. And the whole thing went away. So, and that's okay. That's okay. It would have required me moving from Los Angeles to New York, uprooting my whole family.
Sure.
We see with the Broadway shows nowadays how some of them are only on stage for 6 months, some of them are only on stage for 6 weeks. So that could have been a disaster if it didn't work out, just from a family standpoint. So that was most of my experience with the Muppets, but it was such an honor. I grew up as a Muppet fan. The whole reason I'm doing what I'm doing today is because of the Muppets. And to have been able to perform Kermit, that was literally a dream come true. I was 33 years old when it happened. Now I'm 48 years old. And I remember when I got home after the first day, like literally being like, well, now what? Because I had spent my whole life moving toward this goal of performing Kermit one day, and then I did it. And then I was like honored, but I was also like sort of lost because I was like, I didn't have like a goal past that. Now in the end, it wasn't a long-term thing, and that's okay. Muppets has a group of people that they like to work with, and they're perfectly within their rights to do that. And they have my number if they ever wanted to call me, but I don't think they need me. And I certainly have quite a bit on my plate.
Absolutely.
Not being a part of the Muppets, which can sometimes be a full-time thing because they do so much, really has forced me, and at the same time giving me the opportunities to do other things. Because had I had to put all my time aside to be able to say, no, I got to be able to do this appearance or that appearance or things of that nature, it would have been really difficult for me to take on bigger projects, like Five Nights at Freddy's, like The Jungle Book, like any number of other things that I've really had the opportunity to work on, which I'm so thankful for. So, sometimes something not happening allows other doors to open, which it has. And I'm really thankful when I look back at things. I'm really happy that things worked out the way that they did, because I feel like I'm able to be the best me, and this is weird, as opposed to being the best someone else, if that makes any sense. I grew up idolizing Jim Henson and practicing the Kermit voice and wanting to do that for so long, and when everything was in the midst of happening, my brother, who's 4 years younger than me and super wise, sat me down and said, I hope this works out for you, but I just want to tell you, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but if you take over Kermit, that doesn't make you Jim Henson. Jim Henson is Jim Henson because he created all these worlds and brought people together and made the world a better place. And being Kermit number 3 won't make you Jim Henson. And my hope for you is that you continue to pursue being the best you that you can be, and seeing what you have to offer the world, as opposed to stepping into someone else's shoes and carrying on someone else's character. And I think about that quite often, and he's absolutely right. I've been able to do my own things and sort of charter my own path and say that my dream came true. I was able to make my dream come true, and then move on past it. I don't know if you saw the movie Soul. It's a Pixar movie. And it's about this man who wants to work with this band his whole life, and then when he finally works with them, he's like, okay, well, that's cool. Now what? Um, and he sort of realizes that this band was his inspiration, but doesn't necessarily have to be his destination.
Right.
And I think that's what I've sort of figured out with the Muppets. That being said, if they called me and they wanted me to step in for something, I'd be happy to do it. But I'm really happy on the path that I'm on right now.
Yeah, you're doing some amazing things.
Thank you.
Definitely. And to kind of put a kind of a cap on everything, I suppose. And this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thank
so
you
much for doing this. It's been super cool learning about you and your career. I guess just kind of, for the folks out there who see the end result but may not be behind the scenes, what are some common kind of misconceptions about the world of puppeteering, or things that maybe you want general audiences to know about your craft?
Sure. The first thing is people put a lot of emphasis on the voice of a character, and very often as puppeteers we do the voice of the character. But I think Frank Oz had said it best when he's like, someone's like, "You're the voice of Miss Piggy," and he started to laugh, and he was like, "The voice? Yeah, I'm the voice of Miss Piggy. I'm also the guy who holds this 5-pound puppet over my head for 8 hours a day,
Right.
and does a full performance, and has to sing, and has to do appearances, and has to help make decisions on what's best for this character. And I'm part of the writer's room, but yeah, I'm the voice of Miss Piggy also." So people equate puppetry just because they don't know any better, and it's not as an insult. And obviously voice actors are so talented, and some of my biggest idols are voice actors. But we're not just the voice. We are actually bringing the character to life. I sort of think of us as real life animators in a way. Like, some of my biggest idols are Disney animators, Glenn Keane and Mark Henn and people like that. And their job was the illusion of life, where they would take a drawing and they would bring that drawing to life and make people believe and make people cry and make people laugh. And we do that with a physical object. It's the illusion of life. We bring life to something that without us, hangs over a table or lays on the floor or whatever. So that's the first thing. The other thing, and this is something that we deal with all the time, and sort of a pet peeve of ours, is that we're not crew. We're part of the cast, and crew is super important. Super important. No movie gets made without the crew. Some of the hardest working people I've ever worked with. But we are part of the cast. IMDb would tell you different. They believe we're part of the crew for some reason. If you go on the Freddy IMDb page right now, it lists all the live actors, all the people actors.
Right.
You cannot find who played Freddy or anything like that unless you start digging and you go to other crew.
Oh, lame.
Then you will find us, who played the title characters of the movie.
That's super lame.
So I constantly argue with them. I'm sending them emails. Look, here's the cast list.
Right.
Here's the credits from the end of the movie. Will you please fix this?
You're literally the title character.
Right. So yeah, but being a puppeteer is awesome. It's so rewarding. A friend of mine had said it's like an automatic backstage pass to everywhere, because you get to work on the coolest things. I've worked with Coldplay and traveled with them around the world, which has been amazing. Wow. I just finished doing that this past year, where I got to go to London and France and Buenos Aires.
Oh, how cool.
And a bunch of places in the US performing on stage with Coldplay.
Huh.
Pee-Wee Herman, and I worked with CeeLo Green and Lady Gaga, and I was Homer in the Simpsons episode with Katy Perry.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, super fun job. I actually got to build some of those puppets, and
oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and perform Homer for that. But yeah, you get into all these crazy places that you feel like you don't belong there. You really do, because you're like, oh, look, okay. I'm sitting at lunch with Paul Rubens and John Paragon, and you're like, and I'm just like some dumb puppeteer from the Bronx. And how did I get here? Or I worked on Sesame Street, and I was there with Anne Hathaway and
Wow.
Kevin James and all these different people, and it's just crazy. Like, you go into work each day and you're like, I don't know how this happened, but I'm really happy that it did. I feel super fortunate. And, you know, I try to tell my kids, your dreams can come true. You know that daddy wanted to do this since I was little, and I worked hard, and this is what I do now. And this is how I pay the bills. That toy that you have there and that roll of toilet paper was paid for, as a puppeteer. So my daughter's an amazing singer. She wants to be on Broadway one day, and I said,
oh wow,
you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You'll be on Broadway one day. My son is a whiz, and he does computer programming at 11, and he wants to make video games one day. I was like, yeah, well, good.
Yeah,
and that's what you'll do if that's what you want to do. So for young puppeteers out there, my hope is that you'll continue to pursue this, and if you work hard enough, you can do it. You really can do it, because I am, a living example of that. Someone who had a dream and I was able to achieve it, and I feel so fortunate to have been able to do that.
That's awesome, and thank you so much for sharing all this with us. It's been
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Cool to talk with you. Like, what an amazing career you've had so far.
Yeah. Hopefully it's I get to do a whole bunch more stuff, and I'll come back on your show and we'll talk about it.
I would love to talk to you anytime, seriously.
Sure.
And where can people go if they want to find you and your work?
Oh yeah, so I have a Twitter page. I'm old. I'm 48 years old, so this is a big deal to me. I'm at Artie Esposito, and my Instagram page is Artie_Esposito_art, A-R-T. And myself and some of the other puppeteers, we're going to be doing conventions in the upcoming year to meet some of the fans out there. We're super excited about that. We've been getting so many emails and letters from people, saying, when can we meet you? We want to talk to you about the movie and stuff like that. So we have a few bookings so far, and we're looking forward to doing that in the coming year. So if you guys want to meet me or some of the other Five Nights at Freddy's puppeteers, please call or email your local conventions and tell them you want to meet the puppeteers from Five Nights at Freddy's, because we would love to come there and meet you guys.